Ethan Reyes had 72 passengers, a smooth schedule, and a sky that looked ordinary until it didn't. He was 10 minutes from initial approach fix, engine steady at cruise thrust, when the first wrong thing happened. The coffee slid up. At first it was a trick of the eye, a dark film creeping along the stainless lip of the cup toward the glare shield. Then the whole cup lifted, made a slow arc, and kissed the overhead panel. It stuck there trembling, a brown lens held by a new idea of down. "Instrument cross-check," he said, not quite trusting his voice. He steadied the yoke, as if it might drift too. Neera Patel, his first officer, was already on it. Primary altimeter set 3102. Standby matches. Local QNH confirmed. VSI wandering between climb and descent with no trend. Attitude shows slight right bank. Visual is wings level. She frowned at the multifunction display. Flight management just drew a vector that we didn't ask for. A line had appeared on the systems page, a thin arrow labeled nothing, leaning 30 degrees right, a vertical, as if some software engineer had pushed a patch for the shape of gravity and forgotten to add units. "Denver approach," Neera transmitted. "Professional and cool. Sage 2-1 Heavy, we have anomalous indications on board. Request current field conditions, Sage 2-1. Approach answered, tired and clipped. Expect ILS 26 right. Glide slope unreliable. Localizer good. Surface winds 200 at 18, gust 28. Warning, localized gravity shear present on and around the airfield. Down vector offset approximately. A pause. Paper shuffled, someone whispering in the background. Approximately 30 degrees to the right of nominal. Use caution. Ethan stared through the glass at the front range. It had the indifferent look mountains reserve for human plans. Above them hung a flat wash of cloud, unbroken like someone had sanded the sky. Atlas was up there somewhere, not visible, not gone. Dark mass, dark intent. A week of strange tides and videos of cranes rising tail first, scaffolds leaning, ocean walls standing like glass. None of it had touched his airplane until now. He hit the seatbelt sign, then keyed the PA. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain. You may feel unusual sensations during our descent. Please fasten your seatbelt securely and stow any loose items. Follow the crew's instructions. We'll get you on the ground safely." He didn't say which way ground would be. "Configure conservative," he told Neera back on intercom. "Add 10 knots to VREF. I don't want to hang on the edge of lift and wait to start arguing." "Roger," she said. "Flaps to 5. The flap lever moved with a familiar detent click. "We'll step them as we see what the shear does." They began down. The autopilot hunted for a vertical path that had shifted in ways it wasn't designed to imagine. Ethan felt the yoke develop a sideways weight, as if the wings were pushing against a slope no one could see. He took manual control at 12,000 feet. The airplane settled under his hands like a big animal choosing to trust. "Field in sight," Neera said at 9 miles. The runway looked like a black ribbon nailed at one end and propped at the other. The terminal stacks behind it leaned in agreement with the thin arrow on the MFD. "Make it visual with localizer," Ethan said. "Keep the ILS tuned for guidance. Ignore the glide. Approach confirms cleared visual 26 right. Tower says roll out long if able. They want to keep turns to a minimum on the surface." He pictured taxiways that had become ramps. A sweeping 90-degree turn would put a side load on gear that was never supposed to see it. "We'll stop straight ahead." 8 miles. The airplane tried to drift right without banking. Ethan held a touch of opposite aileron, a breath of rudder. The nose was straight. The lift vector was not. The cabin chime sounded annoying and fragile. Tilt arrow still 30, Nera reported. No change with altitude. Speed 150, he said. Flaps 15. The world fit through the windscreen in a new geometry. Horizon level, runway slanted, his inner ear stubbornly reporting that nothing made sense. At 5 miles, an overhead bin popped in the cabin. A small suitcase climbed out like a slow-thinking cat, floated, then slid along the ceiling toward the aft galley. A flight attendant's voice came, breathless but in control. Please remain seated. Keep your belts fastened tight, hands on the armrests. Gear down, Ethan said. The thunk traveled through the airframe with comfortingly normal vibrations. 3 green, no red. Localizer alive, Nera said. Centerline captured. You are a dot high if we trust the glide slope, which we don't. Flaps 20. Set missed approach altitude in the window, but not planning to go there. He trimmed nose down to fight the odd lightness curling under his rib cage. He glanced at the fuel page. Uneven draw. We're getting unporting warnings? Starboard tanks are overfeeding, Nera said. Cross-feed open. Fuel wanted the low side, which was now the right side, which wasn't low at all in the old sense. The airplane didn't care about the old sense. 3 miles. The runway rose up the right side of the windshield, a wall of concrete threaded with lights. The Pape winked 4 whites like a scolding. He ignored it and flew the picture. 2 miles, Nera called. Sync 700, speed 148. Stable. He could feel her watching him without looking. It wasn't doubt. It was the practiced 2-person focus that kept big machines honest. Stable, he agreed. 1,000 feet AGL. The airplane leaned right again with no roll command, like a man favoring an injured leg. Ethan corrected with muscle memory and a little more. He imagined the lift vector as an arrow out of the wing, no longer perpendicular to the earth, but obedient to whatever Atlas had done. He aligned that arrow with the new down. The airplane stopped arguing and slid along a groove his body could barely sense. 500, Nera said, on profile, on speed. The runway threshold passed under them sideways. Approach lights look slanted, Ethan said, dry, because the joke kept his breathing even. Everything looks slanted. 300. A child cried. Something soft thumped the ceiling and skittered. Ethan felt the tire sidewalls under him as if they were living things ready to complain. 200, Nera said. Winds 200 at 20 on the surface. Expect push right after flare. Noted. 100. The radio altimeter voice ticked down. 50, 40, 30, 20, 10. He didn't flare so much as rotate into the new down, a tiny pitch and a touch of roll, and let the mains meet the runway along a rough diagonal. The sound was a long, high hiss like tearing cloth. The airplane crabbed with the nose straight and the body leaning. The gear did the hateful work of translating physics into heat. Speed brakes, Nera said. Deployed? The panels snapped up asymmetrically, more on the right, as they drooped toward the new low. He squeezed reverse on both engines, then eased the left back a hair more. The airplane nodded, offended, then settled. 80, Nera called. The runway blurred less. The center line tried to crawl up the side window. He kept his feet alive on the rudder pedals, not trusting the friction in the tires to agree from second to second about what friction meant. 60. The nose dipped not forward, but down the slope again. He countered with a whisper of power, canceled it, refused to let momentum pick a direction for them. 30. They rolled to a hiss and then to a shy, crooked stop. The cabin breathed. Someone laughed once and then clapped, and the clapping caught like a small brush fire, strained and grateful. Ethan set the parking brake because procedure was a raft. He glanced at the hydraulic page, levels fine, but the right side low-pressure lights flickered like they had opinions. "A PU start," he said. "Let's not count on engine instruments to stay happy in a shear." "A PU starting," Nera said. Her hands were steady. Her mouth had a thin white line that hadn't been there an hour ago. He took off his headset and listened to the airplane settle. The metals pinged and ticked. The wind had a sideways taste of jet fuel. He brought up the taxi diagram out of habit and then closed it. There would be no taxi. Ground called, voice thin and distant through a network that didn't like the new rules. Sage 2-1, hold position. Do not attempt a taxi. Gravity vector offset confirmed 30 degrees to the right with local variability. Emergency equipment en route. Remain on this frequency. Copy, hold, remain, Nera answered. We'll keep passengers on board until you say otherwise. The forward galley door showed a smear of gray runway where blue sky should be. Outside, a stair truck edged toward them and then drifted the wrong way like a boat in a cross-current. A fuel truck downfield slid, stopped, slid again. Hoses stood half limp, half stiff, shaking his fluid inside, argued with up. Ethan keyed the PA. Folks, we're on the ground. Stay seated with belts fastened. We'll work with ground crews on a safe way to deplane. It may take some time. Please keep all bags stowed. Anything loose may move unexpectedly. Our crew will be with you shortly. The flight attendants checked rows with a climber's posture, one hand always holding a headrest, knees bent for the slope. Row 17, B's expectant mother caught Ethan's eye as he scanned the cabin. He gave her a nod meant to be steady and human. She nodded back, breathing slow, chin high. He filed her face in a mental list titled Watch First. Hydraulics B showing transient low pressure. Nera said quietly, reservoir pickups aren't designed for sideways. Cross-feeding fuel to balance. Do it. He looked again through the windscreen. The runway surface didn't shimmer with heat. It moved. Paint lines bowed in a way paint didn't. Taxiway signs leaned. Approach lights had a curve. The whole field was a fabric pulled taut to one side. Sage 2-1, ground said. Jet bridge is unstable. Stair units are unstable. Hold passengers. Understood, Nera said. She glanced at him. We become a shelter. He nodded. We keep air, power, and calm. The APU gen came online with a thunk that felt like relief. Cabin lights steadied. The air conditioning packs purred. The wrongness outside kept breathing. A flight attendant called from mid-cabin. Captain, we've got a suitcase pinned to the ceiling in row 21. We'll secure it with a belt. Affirmative, Ethan said. Everything tied down. Belts through handles, if needed. He pictured overhead bin latches shearing under loads they'd never see in certification. The crew worked fast, threading belts through straps, building a net from the ordinary. Denver Tower to all aircraft on frequency, a new voice announced across several carriers at once. Field closed to arrivals and departures. Repeat. Closed. Gravity shear is variable and may shift without warning. As if to prove the point, Ethan felt a slow roll under his feet, the slope tilting a degree farther right. Nothing slid. Everything leaned a touch more. In the back, a glass clinked against plastic. Nera exhaled. not quite a laugh. "They warned us in training about unexpected vectors," she said. "They meant wind." "Yeah." He watched a baggage tug begin to creep despite its brakes. Its driver bailed out, stumbled, and then floated sideways a foot before dropping onto the tarmac. He grabbed the tug's fender and hugged it, wide-eyed, both of them waiting for the world to choose a direction. Ethan thought of vectors and bodies and the stubborn human habit of defining down as wherever the floor was. He reached for the checklist, not because a checklist could fix this, but because it gave shape to time. He and Nira worked it. A PU on bus. Engine shutdown deferred, anti-skid left armed, spoilers disarmed to save the actuator some insult if the slope shifted again. In the cabin, the lead attendant reported a mild panic at row 9. A man insisted on getting his roller bag. "Tell him he can when gravity signs the waiver," Ethan said. She snorted, then confirmed he'd been talked down. He let the cockpit door stay open and kept the PA ready. He kept his voice the same temperature each time he used it. Initial shock ebbed into waiting. Waiting settled into a rhythm. Secure, check, reassure. Outside the window, the ordinary gestures of an airport, vehicles, carts, people, played at half speed and on a sideways stage. He didn't let himself think about ATLAS or about tides like walls. He kept the slice of the world he could influence between his hands. "Sage 2-1, ground came back. "Emergency cruise staged." "We are attempting to anchor a set of stairs with tie-downs. Advise any medical needs." Nira looked down the cabin and then at him. "We've got a pregnant passenger, possible early labor." "1 EMT on board, no active bleeding or unresponsive passengers. Copy," Ethan said into the mic. "We'll hold until stairs are verified." "Confirm vector remains 30 degrees. Affirm." He met Nira's eyes. This was as stable as unstable got. He let himself breathe once, full and slow. The cabin quieted to a low murmur, parents whispering games to kids. The rustle of belts tightened a second time, the shuffle of crew strapping loose items to seat legs. For a long minute, nothing changed. Then the light shifted, a thin shadow passing over the field from a cloud that wasn't a cloud. Ethan saw it without understanding, a line etched across the gray straight as a rule. He watched it lengthen, descending with no wobble, no shimmer, no engine noise. It stopped high above the apron, dark and exact against the varnished sky. He didn't name it, not yet. He listened to the airplane, to the breath in the cabin, to the soft tick of the panel. He rested his fingers on the yoke, as if the feel of the machine could tell him what the sky intended next. "Stay with me," he said under his breath, not sure whether he meant the plane, his crew, or himself. He didn't take his eyes off the line in the clouds. The line in the clouds held a drawn blade above the varnished gray, and Ethan forced himself to look away from it and back into the work. "A PU on the bus," he said. "We keep power stable." "A PU gen online," Nira answered. "Packs holding." B hydraulics still flirting with low pressure, cross feed open. Fuel wants the starboard lake. He keyed the PA. "Folks, we're secure on the runway. Stay seated with belts fastened. We're coordinating safe deplaning. Anything loose, tuck it away. Expect everything to feel sideways outside." Orange vests swarmed with the urgency of people pretending the world hadn't slipped. The first stair truck crabbed in, tires squealing on concrete that had become a ramp. It reached the sill, steadied, and then the entire staircase softened under their eyes. The top platform kissed the door and slid, rails bowing as if they were warm licorice pulled by an invisible hand. "Not stable," Ethan said. "Do not open the door." The forward galley panel vibrated under his palm with a steady off-axis weight. A baggage handler jumped from the platform to the tarmac and half-floated sideways before landing again, a stunned laugh breaking out of him like a hiccup. He clung to the stairs frame and didn't try that again. "Belt loader coming," Ground said, thin through static. "We're anchoring it with tie-downs." The belt rattled into place opposite the forward cargo door and hummed to life. Boxes went the wrong way, climbing toward the sky. A loader hit the kill switch and stared at his hands like they'd betrayed him. "Captain," the lead flight attendant called from row 12, "we've got coffee pooling on the ceiling." Lav Waters doing the same. "We're draping the towels to catch it." "Good," Ethan said. "Anything that wants the ceiling, let it have the ceiling, but don't let it become a projectile." They moved the first 6 rows forward to clear space and weight from the listing tail. The aisle was a slow scramble. People used seat backs as holds, boots finding purchase on carpet that had become an incline. He watched hands find hands and leave dignity for later. A teenager in a Broncos hoodie cinched a belt through a roller bag handle and tied it to his seat track. Face set in a stubborn line. A flight attendant patted his shoulder and said that was exactly right. 17B? Nira asked softly. "On my list." Ethan unlatched and stepped into the slope. He braced on headrests, shoulder muscles burning against the sideways pull, and made his way to Marisol. She was gray around the mouth, one hand under her belly, breaths measured and careful. "Contractions?" he asked. 5 minutes apart," she said. "They moved." "Everything moved," he said, and let the line sound like a joke. An EMT raised a hand from row 20. "Can you come up?" Ethan called. "We'll make you a handrail." Passengers linked arms. Belts snaked between wrists. They made a living banister down the slant. The EMT came forward by feel and friction, knelt by Marisol, spoke low, checked, nodded. "We're okay for now," he said, and his voice was the tender kind of firm. "Ops, this is Sage 2-1, Nira said into her headset. "We have a passenger in early labor. Request a stable bay and stretcher if available. Negative on bay." Ops replied. Paper rattled. Voices overlapped behind the mic. "Jet bridges unstable. Stairs unstable. Field is closed. Repeat, closed. Gravity vector remains offset 30 degrees. Do not load passengers onto vehicles." On frequency, a light aircraft broke in, high and frantic. "Denver Tower, Cessna 8. 4-2 Juliet, short final 2-6 right. I can't. My nose is..." The transmission cut into carrier hiss, then came back as a raw shout. "Going around. No, Then nothing. Nira closed her eyes for one heartbeat, opened them. "They should have kept him away," she said. "They tried," Ethan said. "The world didn't play along." A flight attendant eased forward with a trash bag and a handful of barf bags, paused 2 rows back, and looked up. A bright glob of vomit hung from a ceiling vent like a perverse decoration, quivering. "Keep moving," Ethan told her gently. "The air will take care of that one." He and Nira moved in mirror, a practiced divide and cover. She kept the system pages green enough, balancing fuel, cycling electric pumps to keep B hydraulics from starving, switching packs to manual to stop a pack from doing something clever at the worst moment. He held the people steady, voice on the PA, jokes dry enough to hold a beat, instructions that use things people knew, armrests, belts, hands. Ground tried again. We're going to anchor a stair with straps to the tug. We think we can keep the top plate square if we build a triangle. Only if your tug is chained to the planet, Ethan said. He watched the tug's tires creep, treads complaining, as if the whole vehicle wanted to slide into the sky. Copy, Ground said, and he could hear the decision change behind the word. Abort stair. Hold passengers. We are advising all aircraft. Shelter in place. Ethan keyed the PA. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to wait this out on board. We have power and air. We'll bring water to you. Crew will help you moisten towels rather than pass open cups. If you're feeling queasy, eyes on a fixed point, your shoes work. Parents, games are good. Crew, please walk the cabin, but keep 3 points of contact. The kid in the Broncos hoodie raised a hand and said, "What's a point of contact?" And 3 strangers answered him at once, and he grinned despite everything. They improvised. Aft galley drawers became weights. Belts became lashings. People tucked their heaviest bags under seat legs and threaded straps through handles. Anything with a cap lived under a hand. The lead flight attendant asked for volunteers who didn't get motion sick easily. A nurse in row 4, a climber from Boulder in 22, a quiet guy with a firefighter's haircut in 3, all put up their hands without fuss. Hydraulics B is hunting, Nira said, eyes on the EICAS. Keep control field light. If the pickup sucks air, we'll see pressure oscillate. Copy. Ethan's fingers rolled the yoke in tiny checks, listening to the airplane as if it could talk. It did, in the way machines always did, when you'd learned their language. The runway rippled again, no wave, just a slow push. Far downfield, a cargo loader slid 10 feet and stopped like it had hit something invisible. Light standards leaned an extra degree, then held. "Captain," the EMT called from row 17. "She's stable." "We can wait." Marisol gave Ethan a look that said, "Please make this true." He nodded. "You're doing great," he said. "We're not making any long steps until the ground agrees to be ground." He and Nira ate the checklist one square at a time. Engine stayed running for now. Idle thrust was a more reliable brake than a parking brake designed for a world that had angles you could predict. A PU bled steady. Anti-ice stayed on because today was not the day to save a few amps. They closed the cockpit door and immediately opened it again. The line of sight to the cabin mattered more than the illusion of a barrier. Minutes passed without changing anything, and changed everything because they stacked. Shock dulled into the edged patience of people who understood they were not in charge. The cabin found its level in a lopsided way, murmurs, the soft crackle of plastic as someone unwrapped crackers very slowly, a baby starting to fuss and being gently shushed. A man in a suit tried to make a business call, found no bars, and stared at his phone as if it had quit on him personally. "Ops to all aircraft," the radio said. "Be advised, pavement movement observed." Repeat, pavement movement observed. Avoid engine spool-ups. "Do not turn wheels against grade." Nira looked at Ethan. "We hold until they tell us down is down." "We hold," he said. He let his hands fall away from the yoke and rested them on his knees. It hurt to do nothing, but doing nothing was the right thing when motion was a trap. A flight attendant passed wet towels dampened from a sink that gave water reluctantly and sent most of it to the ceiling anyway. People pressed the cloths to lips and eyelids. The sensation seemed to anchor them. An elderly woman took Ethan's hand when he checked her row and told him in a whisper about flying DC-3s with her father out of Stapleton back when runways were flat and men wore hats. He smiled and promised he'd wear a hat next time. It wasn't normal. It was a new normal that held only because everyone agreed to pretend it did. "Captain," Ground said abruptly, "we're getting reports of a feature in the clouds above the South Apron. Tower advises, unknown object, stationary, maintain position." Ethan didn't look up right away. He finished telling Row 9 to leave their bags where gravity could see them. He made sure the belts were tight and hands were holding hands. He walked back to the flight deck and sat. Only then did he let himself look through the glass. The line had thickened. It wasn't a shadow now, but an edge, a perfect filament descending far too straight for weather. It hung there, disdainful of wind and the little dramas below it. Neera's mouth thinned. "Do we say it?" she asked. "No," he said. "We do our jobs." He reached for the PA and held the switch without pressing it, feeling the spring under his thumb. He had things to say. Keep belts on, stay seated. We're safe for now. But the words felt like nails in the wrong wall. "Hydraulics holding," Neera reported, because facts still mattered. "Fuel balanced." "Pack steady, cabin steady," he said back, because people still mattered more. They waited. The filament didn't move. Or maybe it did. By millimeters. By an idea. The airport's noise. The idle thunder of engines. The whine of APUs. The human clatter went brittle and thin, as if the air was clearing its throat. Somewhere aft, the kid in the hoodie whispered, "That's not a cloud." And no one shushed him. Ethan watched a stair truck's tie-down strap vibrate, a taut line singing a note too low to hear. He watched the runway lights curve a little more, paint stretching like pulled taffy. He watched the woman in 17B breathe in, breathe out, squeeze the EMT's hand, and keep going. "Stay with me," he said under his breath to the airplane, to the crew, to the 72 people who had trusted him with their day. He looked at the edge in the sky and refused it a name, because names gave things power. The radio clicked once in his headset, a dry little sound like a cleared throat. He pressed the PA switch. "Belts on," he said. "Eyes forward. We'll move when it's safe. Until then, we sit tight." He released the switch and kept his gaze on the window. The long step would come. When it did, he would take it. Until then, he held still, while the line in the clouds decided what came next. The line in the clouds thickened until it was no longer a line, but a decision. It didn't glow, didn't roar, didn't do any of the theatrical things humans expected from the end of a world. It simply extended, black and exact, as if a draftsman had lowered a ruling pen from the sky. It stopped above the South Apron. The air around it went oddly clean, like the taste of a new coin. The radio didn't pop or squeal, it just wasn't there anymore. The silence that followed felt deliberate. "Belts on," Ethan said into the PA, voice steady because he was not going to give panic a foothold. "Eyes forward. Do not stand." Neera didn't look at him. She didn't need to. "Hydraulics B holding, fuel balanced, pack steady," she reported, offering him a ladder of facts. The needle made no sound as it lowered a filament finer than a wire. It touched the stair truck first, as if testing the water. Bolts that had not moved in years loosened in a single, synchronized breath. Steel washers trembled, rotated, and lifted. Welds fell apart along lines no eye could see. Sheet metal flattened itself like a flower pressed in a book. The staircase's pieces rose in order, casters, pins, braces, in a neat column toward the filament, and vanished into the dark shaft. "Jesus," someone in the forward row said softly. The word didn't echo. It just fell sideways with everything else. The fuel truck went next, but the diesel inside argued. It oozed upward in a translucent sheet, then slid back down the wrong slope, then slopped forward again as if embarrassed to be liquid in a world that didn't want it that way. The tank itself unwrapped like candy and zipped upward in a gleam of surrender. The airplane trembled. It was a subtle shift, more felt than seen, an impatience in the metal, an old animal stirring. Ethan's feet found a new brace on the deck that wasn't a deck anymore so much as a plane where gravity paused. He realized, with a cold clarity that felt almost medicinal, that their plane wasn't a shelter. It was a pantry. Nera whispered, "The seats." He understood at once. Honeycomb aluminum, steel fasteners, tracks, rails, keel. Everything that gave shape to the tube was what the needle wanted. The first sound was almost polite, a crisp ping as a seat rail let go of a bolt that had decided it never loved friction. Another ping, another. Along the floor, snaps went in a spreading ripple, the sound of a jacket unbuttoning in a quiet room. Row 24 rose with an absurdly delicate grace. Passengers strapped in, hands white on armrests, mouths open. No one screamed because the air pressed the sound flat. The row drifted upward, bumped the ceiling panel, pressed, and the panel sighed out of its clips. Foam insulation breathed like pollen. The whole row slipped through the hole and toward the waiting filament as if hoisted by careful riggers. "Hold on!" Ethan shouted, and knew immediately how stupid the words were. Hold on to what? Row 23 followed. The needle did not pull. It invited. Metal obeyed, and flesh that thought it was the master of it went with it, because straps held, because bolts held, because everything humans had invented to keep themselves safe now kept them owned. Nera stood, both hands on the jump seat frame that trembled under her fingers. "Captain, I see it," he said, already moving. He was unbuckled and into the aisle before reason could argue. The pull toward the ceiling was a big hand on his back. He planted his palms on headrests and climbed the slope against gravity's new lie. 17B, the lead flight attendant called, braced like a climber above a ravine. "She's seizing. No, she's breathing. She's okay." Marisol's eyes found Ethan's as he reached her. They were wide, glass clear, terrified and sparking with something that wasn't surrender. "I'm here," he said. He didn't recognize his voice. "We're not going without a fight." Her seat shuddered. The left track let go. The right held with a high, mean whine. The frame torqued. Marisol made a noise he never wanted to hear again. "Knife!" he shouted. The emergency cutter was where it always was, bright plastic in the forward galley. A flight attendant launched it with a precise little throw that gravity curved into his hand. He hooked the blade under the lap belt and sawed. Nylon fought him. It parted. He got an arm under Marisol's knees, another behind her shoulders. She was light in the new geometry, her weight stitched to him by the raw, simple fact that he intended to carry her. The seat kicked once, petulant, then decided to go and left without her. It bumped his shoulder on the way up, as gentle as a thank you, and slipped through the ceiling to join the procession. "Go!" Nera shouted from the flight deck. "Get in here!" He didn't look at the sky. He didn't look at the great, neat column of people in chairs ascending into the needle. He looked at the floor and took small, furious steps. Boots skidding, calves cramping. Hands reached for him. passengers making themselves a rail, and he didn't know whose they were and loved them for being there. In the cockpit, Nera strapped herself to the jump seat until the bolts moaned. Ethan slid Marisol into the left seat like a quarterback protecting a ball, and then stood between them, one hand on the overhead, one on the glare shield that buzzed with a new thin energy. Behind the door, the fuselage peeled, not blowing out, not bursting, not failing, choosing to come apart along seams that had always been there, a zipper finally finding its line. The aisle split its length. Control cables lifted like snakes, charmed by a sound no one else could hear. The galley carts rose in slow rotation, and through the plex, he saw the trivial thing his brain decided to store, a little bag of pretzels spinning inside one cart, one corner caught on a wire rack, trying with all the stupid persistence of the inanimate not to go. Even now, he thought, even now my mind is taking notes. The procession through the ceiling was patient. Row 22, row 21, row 20. A child's shoe tumbled free and stayed, bouncing against the ceiling that used to be a floor. The child's mother reached, fingers splayed, and the shoe drifted out of reach with polite inevitability. She looked down, sideways at Ethan, and gave him a smile that broke something in his chest. He wanted to scream. He didn't. He put a hand on Marisol's shoulder and felt the damp heat of her skin and the coarse fabric of her shirt and the tremor in the muscles under both. "Breathe with me," he said. He breathed. She matched him. The simple act felt like defiance. The needle extended. The filament found the fuselage frames and plucked. The tail rose with dignity and drifted free. The wings held for a long breath, flexed, not with lift, but with reluctant admiration for a force that had rewritten the contract. And then they unstitched and went, a million rivets yawning in relief. "Aluminum," Nera said, voice thin but aimed like a blade at truth. "It doesn't want composites." "Good," Ethan said. He didn't know what good meant. He knew only that the cockpit still held fiberglass, carbon, resins. The needle moved past them like a king walking past poor relations. The CVR was still recording because he'd told it to. He reached out and put his hand on the little black box as if that made it a promise. "Sage 2-1, he said, not into a mic, but into the air. "Denver, we landed. We held as long as we could. If anyone hears this—" He stopped. He didn't know how to finish a sentence like that. Row 17 went. The EMT rose in his seat, head tilted back, hands open, as if to bless what took him. Row 16, row 15. The procession narrowed the cabin to light. "Captain," Nera said. He looked at her. She had a stillness he had seen once before, in the seconds before dropping into a hot LZ in a helicopter with too much to lose. It wasn't calm. It was a cut. "We're the leftovers," she said, not unkindly. He nodded. It landed. The terrible grace of being unwanted. The needle had a definition of valuable. They were not inside it. The last of the floor beams exhaled and left. The cockpit sagged a little and then found a new cradle in the hard embrace of its own shell. They were in an open bowl now, forward windows framing a sky that had edited the airport down to a scattered grammar of useful things. Marisol laughed once, a surprised bark of sound that turned into a breathless half-sob. "My kid," she said, "my kid's gonna hear this story and—" She couldn't find the rest. "He's going to hear it," Ethan said. He didn't know how that could be true. He needed it to be true. He told the words to sit like stones. The needle, finished with Denver's pantry, retracted as precisely as it had arrived. No vibration, no beacon flare, just absence where presence had been, leaving behind a sky the same color as before and a silence with a different shape. For a stretched moment, the world didn't move. The wrong down held. The runway, soft, patient, flowed a few inches more toward the right. Beyond the glass, a plastic spoon skittered past like a toy boat on a slow river. Somewhere far off, a siren managed one broken wail before whatever metal lived inside it remembered what it was for and went. They sat in what was left. The air smelled like ozone and emptiness. The cockpit, stripped of its parent ship, felt suddenly intimate. Ethan could see the weave of the fiberglass in the sidewall and the tiny air bubbles trapped in resin, imperfections that had kept them despised and therefore spared. "Do you think it's over?" Nira asked, not hopeful. "Curious, the way you ask the sea if it's done with waves." "I think it's done with this," he said. "I don't think it knows what over is." He reached for their hands without deciding to. Nira's was cool and strong, knuckles nicked from a galley bin she'd wrestled a lifetime ago. Marisol's was small and burning. He squeezed until they squeezed back. The shell under them began to whisper. It wasn't a creak or a groan. It was a dry, delicate noise like fingertips rubbing paper. The fibers that had been their good luck started to part, not because the needle called them, but because the math that held them together had been revised. The resin gave its bond back to air. The fabric decided it had always been dust. "What is that?" Marisol asked, very calm. "End of the warranty," Nira said, and then she smiled, quick and crooked. It looked like a woman slipping an old joke into a funeral because you couldn't carry grief wrong. Faces moved in Ethan's mind, row numbers, seat letters, eyes that had met his with trust, irritation, boredom, fear. He had landed them. He had kept them. He had lost them to an equation that had never had his name in it. "I'm sorry," he said. It wasn't to anyone in particular, and to everyone at once. Marisol shook her head. "You got us down," she said. "You kept us breathing." Her thumb brushed his knuckle. "That's something." The sidewall turned powder between his fingers. The glare shield sagged inward and traced the curve of his wrist before flaking away like ash that didn't fall but drifted toward the sideways sky. The wind at runway level was a careful thing, more like a hand guiding dust than air moving over ground. He didn't know if the tilt would ever right itself. He didn't know if anyone would walk this runway again. He knew only that his world had narrowed to two hands in his and a sky that had chosen them last. "Ethan," Nira said softly. "Yeah." "You did good," she said. It was plain, and it was a benediction. He let himself believe her. The last piece of the cockpit gave up with a sigh like someone settling a blanket. Their little raft had become a lace of fibers, then a memory of lattice, then a thin, friable edge without edges. The dust lifted, not to the clouds, not to the needle, just up and away along the long, wrong line that the day had drawn. They stayed together. There was nothing to hold on to but each other, and for the moment, it was enough. The tilt shifted a hair, a fresh decision barely felt, and the three of them slid with it as gently as a thought. Ethan kept his eyes open. He owed that much to the machine that had held him and to the people who had trusted his hands. He watched the bright powder of his airplane rise into a sky that didn't care what it had been called. He watched the field breathe and sag and shine. When the last thread went, there was no jerk, no drop, just a release, like a long breath leaving a tired chest. They moved into the air, weightless, not because gravity had surrendered, but because it had been rearranged. There was no up to fall from, only a long step into a side of the world no one had ever had permission to visit. "Hold on," he said, but this time the words were right. They held. Far above, the clouds were smooth as lacquer, where the needle had stitched them. Out at the edges of vision, the world bent in a way that made sense if you didn't ask it to. He didn't ask. He went where the day had pointed, hands locked in the last good thing he had, and the runway slid past like a river on its side, and the sky, indifferent and vast, made room.